Sokka whispered angrily while untying the knots binding Katara to the chair. What the hell did you do that for? I didn't want Katara to get hurt, Aang mumbled. You gotta be kidding me, Sokka humphed. It was a show, a performance. Do you really think the guy was going to let a dragon burn my sister? Come on! Aang bit his lip. He knew Sokka was right. I screwed up. And it wasn't like Aang hadn't realized that they were watching performance. On some level, he had known it was all just an act. Still, he hadn't been able to stop himself from reacting. Not when there was the slightest chance that Katara might get hurt. Risk of injury was always present when bending was involved. An act or not, Aang didn't know enough about firebending or Fire Nation plays to know if there was a real risk that the stunt would fail. He couldn't just idly stand by while Katara was in some sort of danger. He couldn't take that risk. Enough people I care about have already died because I did nothing to stop it. Hey, that's the Avatar, one of the people standing in the crowd pointed out. We better get going, Sokka suggested. Why is the Avatar here in a Fire Nation colony of all places? Does he secretly want to get caught? Zuko sighed. Or maybe our destinies are so intertwined, it gets a bit ridiculous sometimes. The prince weighed his options. The local security was sure to be swarming all over the Avatar and his gang as soon as they got their act together. Though, knowing Aang and his friends, the trio wouldn't make capturing themselves an easy task. The last thing I want is a big showdown in the middle of the street. This is a family event. There are small children here. No one here wants things to go boom, but they still might. And someone could get hurt. The prince had decided to protect Aang from being caught, and the rest of the world from Aang, so he couldn't just stand around when one or both options were real threats. Doing nothing wasn't an option, not for Prince Zuko. If I wished to help the Avatar escape, again, I should put the mask on, Zuko decided. Openly aiding an enemy of his nation on a public place wouldn't go unnoticed. Also, the Avatar wouldn't trust Prince Zuko to come to his aid. The last time I tried to give Aang some advice on what to do, the airbender ran to the opposite direction anyway. He doesn't trust me, and I can hardly blame him for it. I haven't given him much reason to do so. Well, at least not under my own name. Come to think of it, Zuko had saved Aang, or some other member of his team, surprisingly many times, even before he officially decided not to capture the monk. The prince had just hoarded so many secret aliases on the way that no one knew or could even guess it had been the same guy all along. If they knew of all the help I've given them, this might be a bit easier. Zuko sighed to himself. No point dwelling on that now. After making sure everyone's eyes were on what happened to be on the stage, Zuko slipped to the shadows of a nearby building and pulled out his mask. The young man covered his short hair with a scarf that he always kept in his pocket and pulled gloves out onto his hands and put the opera mask on. He always removed his outer robe, knowing it would only get in the way. Zuko's clothing under the robes were dark shades of red, but that couldn't be helped now. The main point was that he was wearing relatively nondescriptive clothes that covered every inch of his skin. The only essential part of the Blue Spirit costume still missing was the dao. Didn't I see some sword-fighting performances when we toured around earlier? I wonder if those swords were real. As potential dangerous performances, people sometimes used deadly-looking swords that were in fact made of rubber kind of material and were completely harmless. While Zuko got changed, the crowd caught on to what was going on. People were starting to realize that Aang's little stunt wasn't part of the performance, and one or two people were already recognizing the airbender. Before Zuko had time to catch the Avatar's attention, a fight erupted in the area around the stage. The security had tried to comfort the kids, which resulted in a tangle of airbending, explosions, and smoke. Even Zuko was having a hard time keeping up with who was doing what and to whom in the chaos. Suddenly, a hooded person in the crowd waved and shouted for the Avatar to follow him. Cold sweat rose on Zuko's back. No way I'm letting the Avatar run off with some mysterious stranger. Zuko felt a burst of irrational anger rise in his chest. That guy could be a bounty hunter or working for Zhao, or worse. The only mysterious stranger the Avatar is supposed to run after is me. Zuko had no more time for preparing himself. He'd have to arm himself on the run. Zuko whistled as loud as he could and waved both arms at the monk, despite knowing how ridiculous he must have looked. Usually the Blue Spirit had more style, elegance, and intimidation factor than this, but the main thing was that it worked. Aang and his friends were already starting to move toward the mysterious man covering his face with a tattered scarf. But then the airbender noticed Zuko waving at them. "Look, it's the Blue Spirit!" Aang shouted so loud that the entire clearing probably heard. "Let's go see what he wants." "No, wait!" The scarf man in ragtag clothing sounded surprised and even worried. "I can take you to see a very important and awesome guy." To Zuko's delight, the other man's words had no effect. The Avatar was running straight for him. "Sorry, buddy," Sokka said to the mysterious man, not sounding angry at all. "We'd rather take our chances with the guy who helped us once already." Okay, I got the Avatar and his friends following me. Now all I have to do is figure out how to get us out of here without anyone getting hurt. Iroh sipped his tea, reminding himself to enjoy the little delights in life. He didn't usually need to be reminded of this, but whenever he worried for Zuko, Uncle had a tendency to underappreciate the things like comfortable cushions and the scent of fresh brewed tea. When this is all over, I more than earned the right to dedicate my life to the simple pleasures in life. Someday, Iroh mentally sighed. It was a bit silly of him to worry over Zuko tonight. The prince had recently broken free of his father's influence, was in the process of putting his priorities straight, and was spending time in a friendly port. Most importantly, his nephew wasn't alone. What was the worst that could happen? Iroh didn't dare linger on that thought. Instead, he focused on the here and now, and turned his attention to the charming old lady sitting opposite of him. All the customs of a formal White Lotus meeting had been handled. It was time to get to business. "I'm pleased you found the time to see me at such short notice," Iroh began. Lady Sara gave a small bow. "The pleasure is all mine. It's been far too long." Iroh smiled a warm smile as a response. "It is not often that our little branch gets to entertain the Grand Master himself," the Fire Nation woman added, half serious, half joking. Sara was a high-ranking member of the Order, and thus knew Iroh's true identity and ranking. They were about the same age. Sara and Iroh had met years ago when they both still lived in the capital. She came from a relatively minor house, and he had at the time been the heir apparent. But they had many common interests, even back then, and had much enjoyed each other's company. Since then, Iroh's military career and duties as a crown prince, and Sara's interest in archaeology had taken them in very different directions in life. After Iroh had become more active in the White Lotus matters in his older age, the two had reconnected, even if only through a letter or two. "To be frank," Sara continued, "I had been looking forward to this discussion. Your letter raised more questions than it answered." Iroh nodded. "I understand how you feel. Unfortunately, I wouldn't be able to answer most of these questions. At least not yet." Iroh and Lady Sara were alone in the small but cozy room located under a small fabric shop. A fireplace lit the room, and to Iroh's delight, more tea was brewing in a pot over it. If Iroh's intel is correct, Sara was not the only Lotus member currently residing in the vicinity. However, Zhong had been invited to this meeting. Not that he would have showed up even if he had been. Zhong was a master firebender and a prestigious member of the White Lotus, but he also was a paranoid man and hard to get along with. The deserter was a military strategist and knew much of how the element of fire could be exploited in battle, but he wasn't well acquainted with the historical roots of firebending. Zhong probably knew less about dragons than Iroh himself did, so sending out an invitation to him hadn't seemed worth the trouble. "After receiving your letter, I reread several scrolls and texts on the topic," Sara began. "As you are well aware, even since I began my attempt at writing down the comprehensive history of the Fire Nation, my personal collection has grown considerably." Iroh nodded politely. He could think of very few people with more knowledge on the official and unofficial points of view on the nation's history. It was her desire to uncover the hidden truths that had led her to emigrate to the colonies. The farther she got from the concentration of political power, the freer you were to study even the not-so-preferred accounts of the past. "Indeed," I responded. "I wouldn't mind going to spend some time going over your findings in detail. However, I can't stay long, so I only have time to focus on the matter at hand." "Yes," Sara agreed. "You are here to learn more about the Dragon Warriors." "Yes, I am. You have heard of them?" Iroh asked, surprised. "I had not heard of such a thing before my nephew used the term this morning." Sara smiled a wry smile. I'm not surprised. The dragon warriors, although apparently a significant part of our nation's history, are mentioned in hardly any written text or scrolls. I'm not sure why that is. Perhaps the stories about them were so old that they had been lost to the wheels of time, or perhaps they've been purposely destroyed sometime in our history, quite possibly during the great scroll burnings of the early years of Azulon's reign. Sara's voice had a bitter edge as she undoubtedly was thinking about all the priceless text that Iowa's father had ordered to be burned in order to manipulate their nation's self-image. Clearing her throat, she continued, I've been fortunate to travel the archipelago quite a bit, and during my travels I have heard many stories that have been passed down from generation to generation as part of our oral history. I've written down and added it to my library stories I doubt vast majorities of even the better educated citizens have even heard of. In the past, I thought these so-called dragon warriors were just legends, but after coming across similar descriptions in multiple geographical isolated sources, I began to suspect there was a hint of truth to them. Your letter was eye-opening. It gave me a whole new perspective on the Fire Nation myths that I had earlier considered dubious at best and rubbish at worst. Arrow nodded. It was one thing to read of things and another to hear such things were happening even today. I can tell you everything I have learned, but I should first warn you that none of it is fact, and some probably outright fiction. The tradition of oral storytelling is arduous. The stories have a tendency to change when people's values gradually change, and different details are given emphasis. Also, people's way of thinking used to be more spiritual, so even the original version of the stories are probably heavily laced with mythical aspects. I can tell you which parts I suspect are most likely to be true, which are only mentioned in one or two descriptions, but I cannot guarantee the accuracy of any of it. I understand, Howard said, eager to hear more but reluctant to rush the woman. As an academic figure, Sarah is used to approaching a research question from a thorough and crucial perspective, and to lay her case well. First, however, Sarah looked Uncle levelly in the eye. I would be most curious to hear how you came across this topic. Your letter did not mention how you came to meet a dragon warrior, but it implied that whoever he or she is, they have only recently acquired their abilities. If you don't mind me asking, who is it? The woman's tone was even, but her eyes burned with curiosity. Uncle took a deep breath. I hope you weren't too upset that I didn't mention the identity of the person in my letter. The information is of such delicate nature that I dare not write it down, not even in an encrypted message. But yes, I know one of these dragon warriors very closely. It's my nephew. Sara's eyes widened. Your nephew? Prince Zuko? The Crown Prince of the Fire Nation? Arrow nodded. The only nephew I have. Wow, the woman said, uncharacteristically taken aback. I will sip some tea, giving Sara time to process the new information. Revealing Zuko's big secret was starting to become a bad habit, but once again, Uncle was sure it would be safe from Zuko's enemies. The Order could keep a secret. Zuko ran toward an alley leading away from the main square. He was determined to lead the Avatar away from the crowd before more security arrived. 2 guards tried to block his way, but Zuko didn't need a sword to take them down. The masked man grabbed a spear from the other man's hand and swept both of them off their feet. Zuko cleared their way before the Avatar had time to catch up, which was good. Zuko had seen Aang in action, and could imagine the kind of painfully large gusts of wind the boy would use to put down his enemies. The prince knew this from experience. He used to be one of those enemies who got tossed around. Peaceful air nomads, Zuko humphed. They must have thought themselves quite the philanthropists, using only attacks that were harmless when used against another airbender, who could land safely from any blow. It must have been very different to be raised in an environment where everyone could bend. Zuko waved for the trio to follow him as he ran down the alley. If we keep drawing this much attention to our presence, we are likely to encounter massive amounts of resistance on the way out. Rather than pushing through the entire town with sheer force, I should stick to my ninja training. I should be sneaky about this. Zuko ran down a few more streets and alleys before he found what he was looking for. Where are we going? Sokka asked when he saw that Zuko had stopped and was looking around himself. Zuko climbed over a wooden wall about the height of a full-grown man, and gestures for the others to follow. The Water Tribe kids looked dubious, but the Avatar jumped right next to him, shouting, "It's okay. He's here to help us get away. We can trust him." Zuko waited for them to hurry. It was only a matter of time before someone came looking for them, and confusing your trackers doesn't work if you are constantly within their line of sight. Zuko offered Sokka a hand while Aang helped Katara. Soon all four were on the other side of the fence. They arrived in a small courtyard, which was anchored devoid of people. "Aang, I know you trust this guy because he saved you from Zhao, but how can you be sure that it is even the same guy?" Sokka whispered loudly at his friends. "He's wearing a mask!" Zuko gestured for them to keep their heads down and stay quiet. Aang whispered back, "It's him, trust me. I know the way he moves anyway." The air nomad gave him a wide smile. Zuko had a bad feeling Aang was referring to more than just the prince's ninja skills. But he couldn't contradict the boy without opening his mouth and saying so. The kids would recognize his voice in a heartbeat. Then they wouldn't go with him, so Zuko kept quiet. The prince tried to feel around himself with his fire-bending, searching for sources of inner and actual fire, was one of the skills the Order of the Shadow had taught. But Zuko had never been good at it. Still, it was worth a shot to quickly scan his surroundings. Zuko reached out with his chi, trying to feel for sources of heat in the vicinity, especially within the two-story building around the fenced yard. After he was relatively sure he couldn't see any fires, actual or inner, in the building close to them, Zuko took out a knife. Again, lockpicking wasn't one of his greatest assets. After a few failed attempts, he crushed the lock with a pinch. "We are breaking into a Fire Nation home," Sokka whispered. "Sweet! Why didn't I think of that?" After everyone inside, Zuko closed the door quietly. You could hear shouts and steps from the street, but nothing suggested their pursuers knew where they were gone. The room was dark, but Zuko couldn't use his bending to light it without losing at least some of the trust the kids had thrust upon him. Wow, they really do trust in the kindness of strangers, don't they? They are completely ready to run after the other mysterious man as well. Maybe without any idea who he was or if he meant them well. It wasn't a new revelation, but Zuko still had a hard time wrapping his hand around the concept. Trust, given freely. What would happen if this was their first meeting? Zuko had kindly asked Aang to come with him so that they could talk. Probably the exact same thing that happened anyway, Zuko quickly decided. The kids trusted strangers without reservation, but Zuko doubted their trust extended to anyone wearing a Fire Nation uniform, or people from the Fire Nation in general. "Find them!" A shout came from the street. "They couldn't have gotten far." Zuko's eyes had adjusted enough that he could make out a ladder leading to the second floor. He poked the Water Tribe boy and pointed to the ladder. "I think your creepy friend wants us to go up there," Sokka whispered to the others. Aang's mask had fallen off during his flashy attempt at a rescue, and Katara and Sokka, who had dropped the mask at some point during their escape. So Zuko was the only one in the bunch still covering his face. Zuko could make out Katara's face as the girl nodded at her brother. Zuko went up first. After 2 sets of ladders and a hatch, they reached the attic. As Zuko had hoped, there was a small window that provided some light. The people who lived in the house used the dusty space for storage. It was somewhat cramped with miscellaneous stuff. There wasn't enough room to stand up straight. The Water Tribe kids and the Avatar snuck to the window, careful not to hit their heads on wooden beams on the way. Zuko closed the hatch after them, and followed the others to the window to see what was going on in the street below. They couldn't stay there forever, but this was a considerably better plan than running around aimlessly. Now that they had found a hiding spot, Zuko could probably plan their next move. "The Prince of the Fire Nation is a dragon warrior." That certainly puts things into perspective. The woman dressed in traditional Fire Nation colors finally managed. "How sure are you of this? Have you personally witnessed one of these transformations you described in your letter?" "Twice," Uncle answered shortly, suddenly urging her to go on. Sara got the hint. "Yes, back to the point then. According to a legend I came across during my travels in the Kunja Islands, ever since humans learned bending from their spiritual animals and forms vary other sources depending on the bending, a connection has remained between humans and said animals. Since my collection is primarily from Fire Nation history, I do not know if similar beliefs of special connections are common in history of other elements. What I do know is that in Fire Nation culture, this connection between firebenders and dragons was believed to manifest in several concrete ways. Some humans were said to possess dragon-like features such as unique bending capabilities and even mind reading, which dragons supposedly use as a method of communication. I have strong reason to believe that part about mind reading has roots in reality. Iroh pinched in. Sara looked curious, but the old man added nothing on where he come across such evidence. Information on the Order of Shadows would have certainly intrigued his White Lotus associates, but Zuko had told these things to his uncle in confidence, and Zuko's trust wasn't easily regained. So Iroh just smiled. Sara eventually shrugged her shoulders and saying, "Very well, sounds like something that shouldn't be possible, but not more so than the rest of it." The most notable way this connection would showcase was when an individual was chosen by the spirits to become a dragon warrior. These stories disagree on what this precisely means, but they all describe it as a physical and spiritual journey. You already know this much from first-hand experience. Uncle nodded, stroking his beard. Despite his young age, my nephew had been through a lot. So much, in fact, that I wouldn't believe he himself considered his role as a dragon warrior too big a problem. Not in comparison to the other problems and complications still shadowing my nephew's life. Nor should he, Sara said earnestly. I can't claim to understand what it must be like for him, or what something like this is happening in today's world truly means. But what I know from history is that the task of a dragon warrior, although never easy and often plain ungrateful, is not a punishment. It's not even really described as a change in a person, but rather a fulfillment of, well, in lack of better terms, his or her destiny. Iroh nodded. He had never doubted that his nephew had a great destiny. Still, sometimes Iroh couldn't help but wish the spirits meddling in his nephew's life would give him more time to find his way before thrusting more destiny-altering events on his path. The role of the dragon warriors varies between stories, Sara lectured on. In a few of them, dragon warriors were briefly mentioned as a type of scary monsters, but more often they are considered respectful and powerful creatures, even heroes. In most of the stories, the usual indicators that a person is a dragon warrior are that the person is dragon-like in behavior, that he or she can commute with dragons, that the warrior can take on the shape and powers of a dragon. Dragon warriors were sometimes referred to as the spirits chosen, which tells us much of the sudden origin of their powers. According to a myth, these individuals were born to be dragon warriors, but this was only materialized after they were touched by the spirits, and only if they choose to accept the spirit's gift. My nephew said the same thing, although from his description I got the impression that the spirit wasn't very explicit on the terms of their agreement, Iroh said. However, he almost emphasized that he wasn't tricked into something, nor was the change involuntary. He said that he knew the decision was big and that he could have chosen differently. Sara nodded. Although a choice appears to be an important part of every story featuring a dragon warrior as a hero, I'm not sure how seen this choice is. There are no existing stories of people who chose not to become a dragon warrior. It doesn't mean that it never happened, only that nothing happened wasn't the kind of news that lived through centuries. The supposed deeds of dragon warriors vary almost as much as descriptions of them. There doesn't appear to be a single logical pattern to them. They are always emphasized as individuals who fought for many different things depending on what their individual hopes and beliefs were. I suspect the spirits didn't choose the people at random, though. We both know that spirits usually have a hidden agenda. Iroh nodded. Yes, they have their own objectives, though hidden might not be the right word. Most spirits aren't making a conscious effort to confuse us. Their mindset is just so different from ours that we do not see the logic behind their actions. And I understand this confusion works both ways, yes? Sara asked. Yes. Most spirits care nothing for what's best for humans, Iroh confirmed. Even if they know something is out of the place in our world and choose to do something about it, they often end up making matters worse. Spirits don't understand humans any more than we do them. Perhaps that is why they choose humans to be their representatives. Sarah led the conversation on. Are you saying that you suspect my nephew was chosen to carry out a task for a spirit? Ira asked seriously. No, I wouldn't say that. Sarah answered, equally serious. But I do have a theory on the matter. Like you said, spirits could use some help in dealing with us. That's why we have the Avatar Institution. Someone who understands both sides and acts as a mediator between humans and spirits. However, since there's only one Avatar, all nations also have people such as or fire sages who help ordinary people deal with spiritual matters. You think the dragon warriors are meant to act as sages? Uncle was puzzled. No, I believe there's more to it. However, in many stories, the spirit chosen are said to have been better at dealing with spirits and dragons alike than ordinary humans were. So acting as a sage was perhaps part of their job, but I highly doubt that was their primary one. Dragon warriors had a much more active role in shaping the world than just that of a messenger. Zara explained. You have to understand, in legends they always had a destiny with a capital D. Whether they chose to do good or bad, their choices always had a great influence on the world. Is it possible that the old dragon spirits chose your nephew in hopes that he would be inclined to do something she wanted done? However, humans always have a free will, no matter what. If a spirit just wanted a task complete, wouldn't she rather do it herself? Sarah looked at him quizzically, obviously about to answer her own question, so Sarah said nothing. My theory is that dragon warriors weren't chosen to fulfill spirits' wishes. Perhaps some spirits wanted a change, but also realized that they don't understand humans well enough to be able to make that change happen. So instead they pick a being of fire for the job. See, fire isn't a peaceful element. When spirits choose a firebender to represent them, perhaps they did this because they know that whatever their chosen would do, a radical change would be the outcome. In the stories, the spirits do not always have their hopes or intentions directly known. Humans have to figure those out on their own or risk angering them. Perhaps doing something is all the spirits want the dragon warriors. They want to stir things up a bit in the mortal world, and for the rest of it to be left up to the chosen individual's judgment. Uncle thought this over and said, You might be onto something. Spirits have always taken a special interest in my nephew. Of this I'm sure, even long before they directly influenced Zuko's life. They have constantly pushed him toward unlikely confrontations that have forced him to make decisions that affect the world. We do not keep running into the Avatar in the oddest places, even when we are not looking for him, and Zuko just happened to find the Order of Shadows, the only people in the world who could teach him how to use the power of dragons. Ao did not believe in coincidences. But you suggest my nephew is still free to choose to do whatever he wants without fear of angering the spirits that gave him this gift? Ao asked. This was important. Bending, too, is a gift from the spirits, and it doesn't come with a code of conduct, Sarah pointed out. Let's say the spirit dragon wants Zuko to change the world. I don't think she cares what Zuko does with his powers. If he tries to rebuild the world, that is well and nice. If he chooses to oppress and destroy, new growth will rise from the ashes nonetheless. Spirits don't really care about collateral damage. Uncle nodded. As disturbing as it was that the spirits had decided to use his nephew in their plans, things didn't appear to be hopeless as he had feared. Zuko had, after all, always been in the position to either inflict great good or great evil in the world. It was part of his heritage as the great-grandson of both Fire Lord Sozin and Avatar Roku. Sarah was absently tracing the painted pattern on her teacup with her fingers. In the stories, dragon warriors could even go against the spirits. Sarah woke Iroh from his deep thoughts. Go against the spirits? Iroh was taken aback. It sounded to him like a very bad idea, but also something his nephew might be foolish enough to do. What were the consequences of such behaviors? Milder than in other stories, Sarah tried to comfort him. In most legends, going against spirits ends badly. However, it appeals to dragon warriors were able to get away with it. Spirits do not understand humans, thus they expect the spirit chosen to use their own judgment. In essence, rebelling is almost encouraged. Fire isn't exactly known to be the most harmonious element, Uncle mused, his hand stroking his beard. Figures we would contradict even our own spirits. I'd hate to say I told you so, but I'm going to say it anyway, the Water Tribe boy whispered to his companions. So that the next time you two suggest a ridiculously risky plan in the name of trying to get to know our enemy's culture a bit better, you can think back to the moment and remember that Sokka was right. And the kids started arguing amongst themselves quietly. Zuko tuned out most of the conversation in order to keep his attention on planning, but still he couldn't help but feel surprised at what he was hearing. They came to the Fire Festival to learn more about Fire Nation culture. Not in a million years would I've guessed that. And here I thought they didn't even know that the Fire Nation had a culture, but rather thought we were solely militaristic society. For once, Zuko was happy to be proven wrong. Maybe there's still hope for a future in which both the world and the Fire Nation live and flourish. The Avatar's reason for coming here was so consoling that it almost made up for his idiotic behavior earlier. Almost. Look, Katara said. They're knocking on doors and breaking them if no one answers. Zuko had noticed that as well. People didn't just disappear into thin air, and the guards knew that. So they had started to search the nearby houses. The good thing was that by now Zuko had a plan. All he had to do was rely to the others. Zuko tapped each one of the kids on the shoulder to get their attention. Then he pointed to each of them in turn with his finger and then gestured toward the floor that they were all crouched on. You want us to go back downstairs? Aang asked. Zuko rolled his eyes despite knowing that the kids wouldn't be able to see his gestures behind the mask. The prince shook his head and then repeated the waving gesture for the kids to stay here. Hopefully they understood. Then Zuko pointed himself then out the window. Surely the concept of sending one out to act as a decoy wasn't completely unfamiliar to these people. No, don't go, Aang said a bit too loudly. We have so much to talk about, like which tip are you from and what's your favorite game and... Zuko shook his head vigorously. That bubble needed some serious bursting as soon as possible. Aang, I don't think he's in a talkative mood. Plus, we need to focus on getting out of here. Zuko could have hugged the Water Tribe boy for keeping his head in the game. For now, he'll settle for nodding. Aang, Katara took the monk's hand into hers. I don't think he's an airbender. Of course he... The Avatar started, but before he noticed, Zuko pointed at Katara, nodding his head empathetically. What she said. But... The look on Aang's face was so sad that Zuko almost regretted telling him the truth. You all saw how he moves, and... Katara's right. Sokka wrapped his arms around the younger boy's shoulders. He's really light on his feet, but he doesn't use any airbending. Whereas you use airbending all the time. You don't walk or run or even sit down without using your bending. I know that. I can see it. But I think he just... Careful. He doesn't want people to know he's an airbender. He's wearing a mask. Zuko took advantage of the fact that everyone's attention was on consoling Aang and quietly pushed the window open. No one on the street was looking their way, and Zuko didn't want to waste such an opportunity. Also, the prince didn't feel right intruding on their private moment like this. No matter who or what they thought he was, in reality, he wasn't their friend. But he was using airbending at Paiho's stronghold once. Maybe it was an airbending kata? I was so sure. An airbending kata? That was possible. Master Kurta had said the teaching of the order was driven from the air nomads. Ninjutsu wasn't airbending, but they had common roots, and both were evasive and fast. Zuko was starting to see how it was possible that the boy mistaken him for an airbender. Still, you'd think an airbending master would know the difference between a real and fake airbending. Fake airbending? Is that what I was doing at Paiho? I never firebend when I'm the Blue Spirit. I'm careful not to. Sometimes I use the power of dragons, but that's different. There's no flames involved. Using firebending without creating visible flames? Is that what I did? Is that what confused Aang? Zuko needed to look into that later. The masked teenager climbed out the window and hurled himself to the roof before anyone on the street saw him. He took a few steps for speed and jumped across the street to the building directly facing their hiding place. He thought he heard a quick, "Come back!" but didn't turn to look. Instead, he ran across the roof and tried to jump down to another street, some distance from their hiding spot. Zuko landed on the ground unnoticed, a state of affairs he was determined to change. An airbender or not, that kid is fast. Sokka pointed out, trying to lighten the mood in the attic. He didn't know how old their mysterious friend was, but from his size, Sokka guessed he wasn't an adult. He might be a teenager, or maybe he was just short and wiry. The masked man jumped to the ground and created a magnificent amount of noise by banging his knife on the metal water tank. Now every Fire Nation soldier within a mile radius was chasing after him. He's in trouble! We have to go help him! Aang, I'm pretty sure that was his plan, Katara pointed out. If he really took out an entire stronghold by himself, this is probably nothing he can't handle. Sokka couldn't quite hide how impressed he was by the guy, and I'm more than a little jealous. A non-bender who could take down people lightning fast with his hands alone? Aang had said he was better with swords, but still, to take an entire enemy stronghold by himself? The guy had a fearless attitude. Sokka had to give him that. It must have taken years of training to get that good. Impressed or not, Sokka still wasn't sure whether they should trust the guy. He hadn't given them any reason not to trust him so far, but why is he wearing a mask? And more importantly, why doesn't he say anything? Sokka looked to Aang and Katara. I get it that he doesn't want the Fire Nation to know who he is. We saw his wanted poster, and that's a lot of money they'd promised for his head. But why so eager to keep his identity secret from us? What is he hiding? Unless... no. He couldn't be. But we do keep running into him in Fire Nation outposts. No way. The Blue Spirit is not from the Fire Nation. He's just following us. Or he's here to harass the Fire Nation, or something. Sokka couldn't quite shake off the feeling that something strange was going on. Things just didn't add up. I don't know why he isn't talking. He only said one word to me last time we met. So he can talk, but for some reason he doesn't. Still, I wouldn't have gone out without his help. Aang was surprisingly determined on the matter. He's our friend. We should go after him. How? Katara asked. Of course. Sokka slapped himself in the face. I almost forgot. Sokka might not be quite the fighter the Blue Spirit was, but he was determined not to be useless. So now he dug into his pocket and pulled out a wooden whistle and blew on it. You've been mentioning that the Dragon Warriors usually had an impact on the world. May I ask how? Iroh inquired. He elaborated. Almost all the beings wish to leave their mark on the world, but most do not have the power to act upon that wish. Due to his rank, Zuko has always been in a position to shape the world more than most, and I don't see how becoming a Dragon Warrior has increased his chances of doing so. Since his transformation, my nephew's skill level has increased slightly. His behavior had undergone some changes, though not only due to his spiritual encounter, but there is, of course, the occasional transformation. None of these changes make him a force to be reckoned with. His powers are nowhere near the same level as those of, let's say, the Avatars. Lady Shara thought that over. According to my understanding, Dragon Warriors are potentially very powerful benders, but just like everyone else, they have to train hard to become all they can be. Shara wasn't a bender, but that didn't mean she didn't take a special interest in martial arts. Still, her weapon of choice was undoubtedly the brush. Words can be more dangerous than knives when used skillfully. So, Iroh put in, do you suspect that we have yet to see all that my nephew has become? Sara pulled herself back into her chair and took a sip from her teacup, frowning. She handed the cup to Iroh with an enchanted smile on her face. The tea has time to get cold. Heat this up for me, will you? Iroh happily obliged, and after a sip, Sara smiled, nodded, and continued. My guess is some changes can only be seen in time. Others will turn up only if Zuko becomes aware of them and hones them accordingly. What kind of changes should I be looking out for? Iroh asked. A special connection to spirits is a power by itself, but not only to be taken lightly. Unfortunately, without personal experience on the subject, I can hardly give specific advice on how to deal with visions from the spirit realm. I'd say having you around will be an asset. Sara gave Iroh a meaningful smile. Everyone who was anyone in the Fire Nation had heard of Iroh's journey to the spirit world. Iroh nodded. There is no one right away to approach a spirit. It all depends on the spirit, the occasion, and other variables. Thank you for the warning, nonetheless, although it comes a bit late. This side of being a dragon warrior was already made itself evident. Sora raised an eyebrow. At least one spirit, Naki, already sought Zuko out. I wouldn't call the trickster spirit a reliable source of information, but it implied that it wasn't the only one who had taken an interest in my nephew. That's surprising, Sora said. Yes, it is, Ara agreed. Spirits don't normally take interest beforehand. They usually only act after someone has wronged them. Even then, they don't often specify their revenge on certain individuals. However, the river spirit made it clear that he had done nothing to offend it. Nor were we anywhere near its natural habitat. Still, the shapeshifter had not only come to see my nephew, but also sabotage his ship. Sora furrowed her eyebrows. Why would a spirit specialize in trickery take such a direct approach? It isn't one of the great ones. Taking down an entire warship is out of its league. Why would it take on such an undertaking if it hadn't been wronged? Arrow weighed his words before answering. I should put out that sinking our ship wasn't the water spirit's endgame. I suppose it was testing us, as a way. I can only begin to guess. It's possible Naki was doing somebody else's bidding. However, I looked up some history on the said spirit, and it isn't known for allying itself with others of its kind. Naki had been rather active in our world, especially for a water spirit. It is mentioned in surprisingly many stories, also considering the type of spirit we are talking about here. It was undoubtedly done more than what is called doing. You think the spirit was just being extremely active? That it was testing the ice to feel for a future threat? Sora guessed. That would be the best case scenario. Still, even if Naki isn't actively plotting against my nephew, that doesn't mean no one is. Iroh said matter-of-factly. Iroh smiled a bit. Anything else? Longevity, Sora said shortly. There is something children of fire have always had. Fire Lord Sozin lived to be 150. That is old for a human, but not for a dragon. Dragon warriors aren't famous for living to be old, Sora explained, because most of them don't die of old age. However, even a cautious estimate suggests that those who don't go down fighting live for hundreds of years. Some stories even imply that since dragon warriors can take on the appearance of a dragon for indefinite amounts of time, it is possible for some of them to live long after all records of their existence cease. Are you saying my nephew could live to be as old as the dragons? Sora shook her head. I doubt any human could live for thousands of years. That would have been mentioned, surely. Still, Zuko could potentially outlive even his ancestors. He might also age differently from other humans. Fire Lord Kinzan, for example, was said to have looked like a young man even at the age of 40. There is no historical proof that he was a dragon warrior, but he would actually certainly fit the part, as I wouldn't rule out the possibility. Iroh nodded. You said the dragon warriors could turn into a dragon for as long as they wanted, so obviously they had control over their change. However, my nephew said turning into a dragon isn't a conscious choice for him, but just something that happened when he's upset. Do you know how he can gain control over his transformations? I hadn't actually thought about that. In the stories, the ability to turn into a dragon was a given. So I suspect Zuko can learn to control his transformation. The how is anyone's guess. Maybe it's just one of those things you get good at with the practice. Learning through experience, Iroh sighed. That my temperamental nephew has always had to do. Is that a bad thing? Sora asked. Not exactly, Iroh answered. Zuko has made many mistakes, but the main point is that he has learned from them. Iroh smiled a wide smile. As an old proverb goes, by 3 methods we may learn wisdom. First by reflection, which is noblest. Second by intimidation, which is easiest. And third by experience, which is most bitter. Needless to say, my nephew tends to favor the latter. Sora smiled at the old general. The way I remember it, you weren't much wiser when you were his age. That's true, Iroh allowed, remembering his more foolhardy days. I just wish Zuko would make his life easier and learn to think before he acts. Though I have to say, Iroh added in lighter tones, he's made considerable headway on that topic of late. You said you already noticed some changes in your nephew. Can you elaborate on them? My nephew has always been temperamental and a willful young man. After he changed, he became slightly more controlled, more balanced. That could be due to other changes he's been going through at the same time, though. However, though, Zuko's more in control of himself. He's become no less intimidating to the people around him. I suspect humans can instinctually sense the dragon in him. That would fit the descriptions, Sara allowed. Arrow went on. I haven't really had a good chance to observe how being a dragon warrior has affected my nephew's bending, but I suspect it has increased his power. His firebending seems to have become more smoother as well. That's interesting, Sara put in. It sounds plausible, even logical, but turning into an original firebender has enhanced one's firebending. Whether that's for better or for worse, I'm not sure, though. Arrow furrowed his brows. What do you mean? Being exceptional turns to one's elements makes one a powerful bender, but if that is done at the expense of the other elements, they might become imbalanced in personality. The real question is whether only the fire part of him has increased or whether he has become stronger as a whole, Sara explained. Uncle mused this over. I believe I already know the answer to your question. After his transformation, my nephew had become less driven. I found it oddly controversial, considering that he was supposed to be more in tune with his element, and ambitious and determined are considered traits of fire. I suspected that this was because dragons are children of air as well as fire, and becoming a dragon has made that part of which is air more pronounced in Zuko. However, it makes even more sense that all his weaker elements, air, water, and earth, have become more prominent in consideration of his dragon fire in him. I hope you're right, Sara said seriously. Though you probably are. In stories, dragon warriors are described terrifying, but not outright hostile. Even if some of them were unbalanced, it might not be connected to them being spirit chosen. Some warriors even called them something every firebender should be aimed to be like. I have some knowledge of the Sun Warriors, Howard began. And they did, indeed believe the dragons were more balanced than the human firebenders are. It wasn't due to the fact that firebending isn't fit for humans, but rather because we have grown too far from the original ideals of fire, and in doing so have forgotten the true essence of firebending. According to them, this is why so many human firebenders misuse their power. Sara smiled. Someone should tell that to Jong Jong. You two don't get along, Arrow guessed. I've only met him once. I wanted to hear his point of view on Fire Nation war history, Sara shrugged. I figured he had a unique perspective on the topic. And that it certainly was. Still, it is difficult to have a meaningful conversation with a person who sees fire as a destructive force, bordering on evil, and stubbornly refuses to acknowledge the possibility he could be wrong. Arrow smiled in sympathy. He had met Jong Jong too. It was before the man became the deserter, but even then it was plainly evident the man respected the other elements to the point where he had no respect for his own. We are all entitled to our opinions, Owl said smoothly. The Order of the White Lotus took in anyone who sought to talk and learn more of history and philosophy, regardless of what nation they hailed from, or how active they were in participating in the war. My point exactly, Sara huffed. Another thing you ought to tell Jong Jong, or better yet, his followers. Sara looked down at her nearly untouched cup of tea. Then she looked up with a small smile on her face. I've led our conversation astray. Back on topic. Perhaps your theory of dragons being part air is true. Perhaps creatures with the ability to fly are bound to be stronger in other elements than just fire. Air appears a rather obvious trait for a dragon warrior, and not just because dragons can fly. Air is the element of spirit, and although dragons aren't known for being spiritual, dragon warriors are known exactly for that. I was about to say something more, but was interrupted by a knock at the door. Who is it? Sarah's voice sounded casual, but her body language made it clear she hadn't expected an interruption. No flower can bloom for 100 years. A voice I didn't know said through the door. Sara went to the door and unbolted it. In stepped a man in his 20s. The young man bowed to Sara and Iowa as they bowed back. No further introductions were made. I'm sorry to disturb you, but I thought it prudent to let you know that something's happening in town. A fight erupted at the fire festival, but it ended quickly. However, now there's a citywide search going for the culprits. It is unlikely the guards will come here, but it might still be wise to continue this meeting another time. We were about done. Sarah looked at Iroh levelly. If that is fine by you. Yes, I suppose we were. Once again, thank you for your time. The things we discussed here will surely be of use to me, Iroh said pointedly, and softened his words with a heartfelt smile. Then the men turned to address the newcomer. About this commotion, you don't happen to know who it was that they were looking for? A fight at the Fire Nation Festival. Uncle had an unnerving feeling that Zuko was somehow involved. People say it was the Avatar who started the fight, though some say it was the masked man known as the Blue Spirit. The soldiers are looking for both. Iroh took a very deep breath. Why do I bother to ask? I'm not sure if he wants us to go back for him, Sokka commented. Surely he would have said or waved something about it if that was part of the plan for us to go get him. Aang pulled on Appa's reins. I'm not leaving him behind this time. Ignoring the few firebolts that the soldiers were throwing their way, Aang guided Appa back toward the center of town. He didn't care how well the Blue Spirit could take care of himself. When you're working on a team, you don't leave people behind. Luckily, it wasn't difficult to pinpoint their new friend. The masked man was but a dark flash against the roof tiles, but the 20 or so firebenders running behind him gave his position away quite easily. Yip, yip. Aang urged his animal companion to go faster. For some reason, Appa was reluctant to comply. Come on, Appa, the Blue Spirit needs our help. Appa grumbled, but made no move to get any closer to the fight. I know you don't like fire, but we'll be in and out before you know it. Aang assured his bison, finally getting it to descend. Why are they still here? He dodged a firebolt by leaping to the other side, then went back to jumping from rooftop to rooftop. Surely they didn't come back for me, and what reality was that even part of our plan? It was all Zuko had time to think before Aang shouted, Don't worry, we'll rescue you! Proving Zuko's doubts right. He waved at the Avatar, attempting to communicate they didn't want to be rescued, and that they should leave without him. Stumbling, Aang guided Appa right to the fight, waving at Zuko to jump aboard. Now what? As Zuko went with the Avatar, they might figure out who he was and things could get complicated. On the other hand, they weren't leaving without him. Sighing to himself, Zuko accepted the Avatar's outstretched hand and hauled himself atop the bison, much to the animal's dismay. I guess one of us remembers that I'm not your friend, or at least can smell the dragon on me. Dodging firebolts, Aang guided the animal up and out away from the town. Zuko took a moment to catch his breath and then turned to face the others. As the light of the colony grew distant, it occurred to Zuko that they had essentially been kidnapped by the Avatar. Great, now what? That was close, Aang commented and turned to look at the 3 youngsters sitting in the saddle. The Water Tribe kids said nothing. Everyone's eyes were on Zuko, waiting for him to say something. Zuko briefly wondered what would happen if he took off the mask and casually said, You can say that again. What would happen after that depended on if they would try to talk to him before Katara waterbended him off the bison. Well, the tree tops weren't really that far below them. Zuko could probably take the fall. They think I'm a monster, and I've given them little reason to think otherwise. Even if they would stop long enough to hear me out, what could I say to them that would convince them that this isn't all part of some elaborate plan to capture the Avatar? I could try to tell them I am no longer their enemy, but that would be lying. If it even came down to a choice between the Avatar and his nation, not at all an unlikely scenario, Zuko would side with his people in a heartbeat, no questions asked. Zuko had let the Avatar go because the prince had doubts about the righteousness of the war, and the world needed someone to put an end to all the killing. But if Aang ever truly became a threat to the safety of his people, Zuko would use any means necessary to stop the boy. And that wasn't something friends did to friends. Or was it? Now that we're all safe and sound among friends, we can relax a bit, Sokka said seemingly to everyone, but the words were obviously aimed at Zuko. Zuko felt irritated and confused. This was not what he had agreed to. The plan had been to get the Avatar out of the colony without casualties. Mission accomplished. What more did these people want from him? Zuko sighed out loud. Hadn't he just today thought to himself that protecting the Avatar from Zhao and any of the other idiots would go a lot easier if the monk knew Zuko wasn't trying to capture him anymore? What was the worst thing that could happen if he took his mask off right here, right now? And if he just spoke to them and convinced them that he was on their side? That was actually the worst possible outcome. Because then, when Zuko would eventually have to defeat the Avatar to protect his people, they will feel hurt and betrayed, and he would have to turn against them. Fulfilling his duty to his nation would be easier if the Air Nomad and his friends thought of him as nothing more than one more enemy. That way, Zuko couldn't let them down. He wouldn't have to make promises, implicit or explicit, he couldn't keep. Zuko shook his head. What was he thinking? He couldn't actually be considering any of this. The situation was in fact very simple. This is war. We are not on the same side. Facing problems head-on was how Prince Zuko went about his life. The Blue Spirit, on the other hand, he was elusive. He showed up out of nowhere and vanished in thin air when he was done. Neither Zuko nor the Blue Spirit was known for asking for permission to leave, especially when they were surrounded by enemies. From the corner of his eye, Zuko saw something glittering in the moonlight. His time had come. He would make the most of it. The teenager grabbed the side of the saddle and jumped over it. His short fall ended in a wide, muddy river that had been flying over. The water was warmer than he expected. Zuko surfaced and swam to the other bank as fast as he could. As he had feared, the Avatar had turned his bison around and was coming back toward the river. Zuko climbed out of the water and ran for the forest, trying to find a good hiding spot in the lush undergrowth. Running from any problems didn't solve them, but Zuko was in no mood for it tonight. Surprisingly persistent, the air nomad just wouldn't leave. He landed the bison near the riverbank. Zuko could just make out what they were saying. He didn't fall, he jumped. Sokka said loudly, and I'm telling you, it's not something we did. The guy has some serious trust issues. Please come back, Aang shouted. We're not going to hurt you. The kids were coming closer. Still, Zuko was confident that they would never find him in the dark forest. Not without firebenders on their side. Suddenly, Zuko could feel it. There were firebenders in the vicinity. A lot of them. Drop your weapons and come with us peacefully. You will not be harmed, a stranger's voice declared. The Avatar's game was too far for Zuko to see what was going on, but from the sound of it, they were being ambushed. Now what? Zuko wasn't even that angry, just confused. Did they get in this much trouble every day? Easy there, Sokka said. We don't come here to pick a fight, we're just looking for... We know who you are, we know why you're here. One of our men followed you to the fire festival. We know you're looking for a firebending master. Oh yes, on the long run, Katara put in. And we'll have to learn firebending at some point, though that was not what my brother was talking about. We can take you to see Master Zhong Zhong, and we'll decide what to do with you. The who now? Sokka asked. Master Zhong Zhong, the first person ever to desert from the Fire Army. He's a great and wise man. He will know what to do with you. Zhong Zhong the deserter is here? Wait, you guys are Fire Nation? Sokka pointed out the obvious. But you also think deserting from the Fire Nation army is a good thing. Aang, Katara, maybe we should have a talk with this Zhong Zhong fellow. I'm not sure we have much of a choice, Katara said. The crowd began moving away from Zuko's location, and he could no longer make out what they were saying. Zuko wondered if he should keep following them to make sure that they were going to be okay, but decided it wasn't necessary. Zhong Zhong may have been a traitor, but he was also a pacifist, famously so. He wouldn't hurt the Avatar or his companions. Also, Zuko had officially had enough of babysitting the Avatar for one night. Kind of ironic how this forest appears to be full of Fire Nation traitors eager to help the Avatar. After Zuko was sure the crowd had moved far enough, he got up again and ran into the night. The Avatar might need me, but most likely he'll be just fine. I should do right by my uncle for once and get back to the colony as soon as I can. By now he's probably heard about what happened. He'll be worried. Zuko returned to the river. He was pretty sure it's the same river that passed near the colony. All he had to do was follow it, and with a little luck, he'd be back with his uncle and his crew in no time. Luck. Since when do I count on my luck? Zuko shrugged and began jogging his way downstream.